Good evening. My name is Patty Cooper. I'm from Shelbyville, Indiana. My topic is the faith of Sarah, and the title of my lesson is Faith Between the First and Last Laugh. Many years ago, on a stormy night, an elderly couple entered the lobby of a small hotel and asked for a room. They were informed by the clerk that there were no rooms available. But I can't send a nice couple like you out in the rain at 1 o'clock in the morning, he said. Would you be willing to sleep in my room? The couple hesitated, but the clerk insisted. And the next morning, when the man paid his bill, he said to the clerk, "You're the kind of man who should be the manager of the best hotel in the United States. Maybe someday I'll build one for you." Well, the clerk just smiled, amused by the man's little joke. Several years later, the clerk received a letter from the man asking him to come to New York City for a visit. He had enclosed a round-trip ticket. When the clerk arrived, his host took him to the corner of 5th Avenue and 34th Street, where stood a magnificent new building. That, explained the man, is the hotel I have just built for you to manage. The young clerk, George C. Bolt, became the first manager of the famous Waldorf Astoria Hotel because William Waldorf Astoria kept his promise. Sarah is one of 2 women listed in Hebrews Hall of Faith. Hebrews chapter 11 is a beautiful account of the grace and forgiveness of God. Most of the people in this chapter made mistakes. They committed a multitude of sin, from lying, deception, unbelief, adultery, even murder. Yet in Hebrews 11, God records none of those things. Hebrews 11:11. Through faith, also Sarah herself received strength to conceive seed and was delivered of a child when she was past age, because she judged him faithful who had promised. Sarah is the example of a courageous, strong woman who, through faith, transformed her non-spiritual reality into one of great spirituality, even when all the surrounding circumstances of life were working against her. Through faith, she trusted God to keep his promise. And we're going to look at several aspects of Sarah's faith. Like most things in the Christian walk, faith has to develop and grow. And when we are first introduced to Sarah, her faith is experiencing growing pains. Sarah and her husband Abraham began their married life in the city of Ur. According to Joshua 24:2, Abraham's ancestors had served idol gods. We don't know how or when Abraham was led to the Lord, but Genesis 12:1 says that God appeared to Abraham and told him to leave Ur and travel to a land that he would show him. Abraham was 75, so Sarah would have been about 65. That's retirement age. Sarah's faith really began on the day that her husband walked in and said, "Start packing because we're moving." "Well, where are we going, Abraham?" "I don't know, Sarah. God just said he would show me." So for all the people who think that Sarah did not exhibit enough faith to be in Hebrews 11, I ask you to put yourself in her shoes. She's informed by her husband she has to leave her home, her family, and begin an uncharted journey into the unknown. And she has to trust a God who at that time she barely knows. They are to travel many miles to Canaan, a land that was fertile with the promises of God, but it was barren of everything that Sarah cherished and held dear. In anybody's book, that took faith. Through faith, also Sarah herself received strength to conceive and was delivered of a child when she was past age, because she judged him faithful who had promised. Now, if you did not know the full account of this story, it would be easy to read that verse and get the idea that God spoke the promise of a son, and 9 months later, Sarah is bouncing Isaac on arthritic knees. But the examples of faith in Hebrews 11 are not for the extra special or super Christians. Their stories are what genuine faith looks like when it is lived out, walked out in everyday life. These people were not superstars of faith. They were ordinary men and women just like you and I. They made mistakes. They sinned. They disobeyed. They leaned on their own understanding instead of waiting on God. And that's where we now find Sarah. There are 3 laughs in Sarah's story. Abraham laughed the first time for joy. Sarah laughed in disbelief. And finally, she laughed for joy. But between the first and the last laugh, Sarah's journey of faith will be a bumpy ride. The second step in Sarah's faith. Faith takes a detour. When God spoke to Abraham, he promised him an heir from which would spring a great nation. Now that's a fantastic sounding promise, but there is one huge problem. Sarah is barren. And in the world that Sarah lived in, women did not have a lot of value. They didn't have degrees. They didn't have PhDs or careers. The only thing that gave a woman honor or even a feeling of self-worth was the number of children she gave her husband, especially sons. Sarah had been deprived of that pleasure. She would have been pitied and looked down upon by other women. The years are speeding by since God first made the promise. And Sarah does not need a mirror to tell her how old she's getting. Her bones tell her every morning when she gets out of bed. She can no longer work like she used to. She finds herself having to sit down and take more breaks during the day. Hebrews 6:12 says it's through faith and patience that we inherit the promises. But Sarah had run out of patience, and she did what many of us do. She starts thinking, God needs a little help here. And she takes matters into her own hands. Her faith takes a detour. Genesis 16, 1-3. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, bare him no children. And she had an handmaid, an Egyptian, whose name was Hagar. And Sarai said unto Abram, Behold now, the Lord hath restrained me from bearing. I pray thee, go in unto my maid. Listen to this. It may be that I may obtain children by her. Is that how faith sounds when it takes a detour? God said, you shall have an heir. Sarah child by Hagar. And the Bible says, and Abram hearkened to the voice of Sarai. Sounds like his faith has gone a little bit south. Verse 3, and Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, after Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan, and gave her to her husband, Abram, to be his wife. Now what Sarah and Abraham did was perfectly legal in those days. Sarah owned Hagar. So therefore, any children that Hagar gave birth to would belong to Sarah. But not everything that is legal is accepted or approved by God. Amen. He never accepted Hagar as Abraham's wife. In Genesis 16:8, the angel of the Lord called her Sarah's maid. In Genesis 21:10, she's called this bondwoman and her son. Yes, Hagar gave Abraham a son, but this detour was not in God's plan. Sarah's plan was a total disaster. It resulted in Abraham having to send Hagar and Ishmael, his firstborn son, away, and it created problems that still exist today as the Israeli-Arab conflict. Detours are always risky and sometimes dangerous. If you take a detour in the natural, believe you me, we took one once on our way to Tennessee. We were going to see the scenic route. Many times you find yourself traveling much farther out of your way and sometimes even getting lost. Taking a detour spiritually can result in sin and being out of fellowship with God. Abraham was 86 when Ishmael was born. He will be 99 before God speaks to him again. Was that detour worth it? I don't think so. The lesson that we learn from Sarah's detour is that God's will must be fulfilled in God's way and in God's time. When I first started this study, I wondered if I could personally identify with Sarah. And I found out we had more in common than I imagined. For instance, she was near my age when she had to pull up stakes and follow Abraham. Now, at my age, I wouldn't want to move anywhere right now. But I sure would not want my husband to walk in and say, "We're moving." And guess what? I have no idea where we're going. Also, like Sarah, I tend to have a problem with patience. When I want something done or I see that something needs to be done, I want it done yesterday. Well, my husband, on the other hand, is a procrastinator. So, between our extremes, we balance each other out. But in Sarah and Abraham, if they had only realized God was waiting, He was delaying for their bodies to be as good as dead, so that Isaac's birth would truly be miraculous, and so that God alone would receive the power, the honor, and the glory. As we follow Sarah's story, we fast forward. 13 years have gone by since the birth of Ishmael. God finally breaks his silence and appears to Abraham once again in Genesis chapter 17. God reviews the covenant he made with Abraham and promises to multiply his seed. God also tells Abraham that Sarah will bear a son and be a mother of nations. At this meeting, God gives this couple new names. They are changed from Abram and Sarai to Abraham or Sarah. Names were very important in that day. They meant something. Abraham means father of a multitude. Sarah means princess. As Genesis chapter 18 begins, Abraham is sitting in the door of their tent when he suddenly has 3 visitors. Most scholars believe this was a pre-incarnate visit of Jesus Christ and 2 angels. A meal is prepared for them, and as they are eating, they ask where Sarah is. Abraham said she's in the tent. Sarah's faith is going to be tested again. Faith will battle doubt. Genesis 18, 10 through 15. And he said, I will certainly return unto thee according to the time of life. And lo, Sarah, thy wife, shall have a son. And Sarah heard it in the tent door, which was behind him. So the Lord is speaking to Abraham. Sarah's out of sight, but she's eavesdropping. Now Abraham and Sarah were old and well stricken in age, and it ceased to be with Sarah after the manner of women. Therefore Sarah laughed within herself, saying, after I am waxed old, shall I have pleasure, my Lord being old also? Point number 3, the laugh of unbelief. It's been over 2 decades since God made the promise. Now Sarah has watched the wrinkles get deeper. She's watched her hair get whiter. She's seen her husband get older. In the middle of the day, he's sitting in front of the tent. She's also dealt with the humiliation, the hurt of not being able to have a child. She's dealt with the humiliation of Abraham's name. It was bad enough when his name was Abram, which means exalted father. But ever since he came in and announced his name was changed to Abraham, which means father of a multitude, the servants had not stopped laughing. At 99, what chance did he have of being a father of many? I don't know what was going through Sarah's mind. But when she heard the Lord say she was going to have a child, faith faltered, and she laughed the laugh of unbelief. We know it's a laugh of unbelief because the Lord rebukes her. Genesis 18, 13, and 14. And the Lord said unto Abraham, wherefore did Sarah laugh? Or why did Sarah laugh, saying, shall I of a surety bear a child, which am old? Now here's the rebuke. Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the time appointed, I will return unto thee, and Sarah shall have a son. Now keep in mind, verse 12 says, Sarah laughed within herself. How shocked she must have been to realize the Lord heard her. Genesis 18:15. Then Sarah denied, saying, I laughed not, for she was afraid. And he said, nay, but thou didst laugh. Sarah said, I didn't laugh. God said, you did laugh. Period. There's no arguing with the omniscient God, the righteous judge. He settles the matter. You laughed. Now, he's not angry with Sarah. He's surgically working on her faith. Developing genuine faith can be a long, rough journey, even for heroes and heroines of faith. Sarah's faith has one more huge hurdle. Chapter 20 finds Abraham on the move again. He uproots his household and travels to Gerar. Abraham's a stranger in town, and he fears the king of the region, who is called Abimelech. Here we have incident number 4. Faith is almost derailed. Genesis 22. And Abraham said of Sarah, his wife, "She is my sister." And Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah. As a woman, as a wife, I cannot begin to imagine what Sarah must have felt. For one thing, she's feeling deja vu. This is not the first time Abraham has done this. He did this same thing in Egypt with the Pharaoh. She was rescued by God at that time, but she has to be wondering, has my luck run out? She knows what it meant when the king sent for her. Sadly, her prince, the man that she calls Lord, Abraham put up absolutely no fight for her. And what a long night it must have been for Sarah as she waited for that knock to come on her door. And she must have trembled with every footstep she heard. Where is Abraham? Doesn't he love me anymore? Doesn't he care what happens to me? Why doesn't he rescue me? If Sarah had only known, there was no way God was going to let his plan be derailed. The seed of the covenant was going to come from Abraham. God would move heaven and earth before he would let a pagan king touch Sarah. Now, you may disagree with me, but in my imagination, I think it's probable that God had already begun the work of restoring Sarah's body. Think about it. Why else would a king desire a 90-year-old woman? She had discovered the fountain of youth. Abimelech did not come near her that night, but he certainly had a visit from God in his sleep. And God told him Sarah was Abraham's wife. And God told him in verses 6 and 7 of chapter 20, I withheld thee from sinning against me. Therefore suffered I thee not to touch her. Restore the man his wife, and you shall live. If you restore her not, you shall surely die. Abraham almost lost both Sarah and Isaac. In that day, a king had a right to take any woman he wanted into his harem. God intervened to keep his great plan of salvation from being derailed. Sarah was a real flesh and blood woman. Now, I, for one, do not believe that she could conceive of being the mother of a nation. She just longed for one tiny baby to hold, to kiss, to cradle, to rock and nurture. Since the first laugh, her journey has been long. It's been filled with failures, danger, and many adventures. But now we see faith come to fruition. Genesis 21, 1 and 2. And the Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did unto Sarah as he had spoken. For Sarah conceived and bare Abraham a son in his old age at the set time of which God had spoken to him. Verse 6, and Sarah said, God hath made me laugh, so that all that hear will laugh with me. Sarah's first laugh was unbelief. Her last laugh was a joyful celebration. Point number 5, faith reaps its reward. Hebrews 11:12. Therefore sprang there even of one, and him as good as dead, so many as the stars of the sky in multitude, and as the sand which is by the seashore innumerable. It took 25 years, but God kept his promise. The future redemption of a lost world rested with this little baby boy. Isaac would beget Jacob. From Jacob would come the 12 tribes of Israel. And from Israel, the promised Messiah would come. Sarah and Abraham and all the other heroes in this chapter walked not by sight, but by faith in God to do what he promised. They lived in tents because they knew they were not citizens of this world. Every day I live, I feel more and more and more, this world is not my home. I don't belong here. They looked for a city whose builder and maker is God. But the promise was afar off for them. Yet you and I have the promise. We have the words of Jesus that he is preparing that city for us, and he is coming back for us. You and I have John's revelation of that city that is beyond comprehension. These heroes of faith lived as nomads in tents, in refusing to let their hearts be set on material lands and possessions. God promised the land of Canaan to Abraham, so in a sense, every inch of it belonged to him. Yet the only parcel of ground he ever bought in Canaan was a tomb to bury his dead. The Apostle Peter makes it plain that as Christians, our citizenship is in heaven. The last 3 months should have taught us that our jobs, our 401ks, our homes, everything we own, our health, our civil and religious liberties can be gone overnight. So why cling to them? It's time to lay aside every weight, every sin that is pulling us down, and fix our eyes upon Jesus and work while it is still day, or while we still have the liberty to work. It's time for the church in America to become eternity minded. Jesus Christ is soon coming for a church that is watching and praying. Sarah died in faith, never having seen the promise. Yes, she gave birth to Isaac, but she never saw the innumerable multitude that came from her son. Hebrews 11:11. Through faith also Sarah herself. It was not just Abraham's faith. Sarah had faith. Why did the Holy Spirit place Sarah in the hall of faith? I don't know when it happened, but somewhere between the first and last laugh, Sarah judged him faithful who had promised. She came to realize that nothing is too hard for the Lord. Sarah found out that God is able. He's able to do. He's able to do what she asked. He's able to do what she could think, able to do what she could ask or think. Sarah found out God is able to do all that she could ask or think, able to do above all she could ask or think, able to do abundantly above all she could ask or think. Between the first and last laugh, Sarah's faith led her to believe that God is able to do exceeding abundantly above all that she could ask or think. Through faith, also Sarah herself received strength to conceive seed and was delivered of a child when she was past age, because she judged him faithful who had promised. God bless you.